Hi, I'm Karen and I'm here with Kelly, and we're going to be continuing to answer your grief questions here today. So I think Kelly and I are both kind of excited about this next one because it's just one of those things that's always very special, I think, to talk about with people because it's not necessarily like a mainstream conversation, but it's such an important one. And I think one that people feel kind of delicate about. But the question that we got here, is it normal to feel the presence of people who have passed away?
Yes. I think when you're doing grief counseling, one of the first questions that I ask in my initial session is like, what are your beliefs happen? What do you believe happens when somebody dies, right? Because that is something so important that comes up when we're meeting with a grieving individual. And, some people don't feel anything. That's okay. And some people have a belief, in heaven, or they do believe that they can connect with their loved ones. And so we talk about that. Obviously meet them where they're at with that. But there's some stories that I think from my time at hospice and from my years of doing grief counseling, like it's hard to not believe some of these things that it's actually real and that it can happen. And, I think so many of my clients see mediums. They talk
Mhm.
about wanting to see a medium, and some go very soon after a loss and go multiple times. I've seen a ton of mediums myself, so I'm one of them as well. But I do think, I think it is different for everybody. Sometimes people believe in the signs, like the cardinals or the butterflies or the pennies or the dimes. And then there's sometimes that the people come through, they have these dreams, right? Which we can call after death communication. And after death communication is naturally occurring. It's not something we ask, force happens. It just happens. And the majority of the time it does happen in our dreams. And I think there's a difference between having a regular dream where our loved one is in and an actual dream where you can kind of feel them and they're deceased. I've had one and it was pretty powerful and I still remember it 23 years later.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's definitely a difference with those. And then there's the times where you just kind of feel like maybe they're there, maybe their presence is there, or you have a thought in your mind that you would never think, and you're like, oh, is that from them? And I think it's amazing. I love talking about this stuff. I love all the stories I've heard. And I definitely think it's normal
Yeah.
and very common.
Yeah, I agree. And I love talking about it too. And not because I do have a strong, definitive faith. But I think it's such an important part of this journey for people. And I think at different parts of our lives, we'll think about this stuff. Some people maybe more passively than others. For some people, it's, the way they were raised, a very big part of their upbringing. Um, I find for people who maybe had a not certain faith, this really brings up a lot of questions. But
Mhm.
interestingly, even those who do have a very strong faith maybe find some questions because then it's like, well, this doesn't seem fair. Sometimes people struggle, with their faith in the wake of loss because sort of that, like, why do bad things happen to good people that gets challenged? This person did everything right. I've tried to do everything right. My being punished, brings up a lot, but I do think it really adds, a whole different level of curiosity for people, or almost urgency in some ways that like they really do feel like they need to get the answers. And what's hard about it is that they're not there. I mean, I run a program about the kind of bigger questions. I also do one with the dreams and signs. And I always say to everybody, like, listen, I'm not here to give answers, for anything, but to at least create a space to talk about it. Because I think that could be part of it too, is that there really isn't a lot of space to talk about these things with people. When people I talk to often say, like, oh, you're going to think this is crazy, or I almost
Mhm.
feel like I can't tell you this, you
Exactly.
know. Um, so I do really encourage people to try and open up and, have that opportunity because, hopefully they'll find someone that can sort of reinforce some of it and validate it. Working for hospice, my goodness, I did the same for 17 years. And that's where I heard so many stories that I always say to everybody, like, it just made me feel enough like, well, there is something. That's all I can tell you.
Exactly.
That's it.
Exactly.
There's
Yep.
something. Um, and what I say to people too, because there's an interesting phenomenon that I've come across a lot, that people do have some sort of encounter, but then quickly sort of doubt it, almost like it's too good to be true.
Yes. Yes.
Like, am I manifesting this because I want this to be true? And I often find it's people who do have a certain openness and who have kind of created the space for it, but then like as soon as it comes in, then they're like, no,
Mhm,
you
just shut
know,
it right down.
yeah. So, listen, I don't know what's real and what's not real, but I know feelings are. And I've had a very, very detailed, unbelievable visitation dream myself. And whatever it meant, I don't know for sure, but the feelings that followed, those are real. And I
Exactly.
will hold on to those feelings and the comfort and the peace that it gave me. So I try
Mhm.
to remind everybody that whatever that initial feeling, again, of peace, comfort, connectedness, like that's real, that you can hold on to.
Yeah, definitely. So I am actually trained in something called induced after death communication. And one of my clients went to a medium, and the medium was like, "Oh, you need to do some EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a trauma treatment that's been around for about 30 years." And she's like, "Oh, I'm already doing EMDR." And the medium said, "Well, you need to tell your therapist about this book." And so it's induced after death communication. It's a intervention that was founded by a psychologist at the VA, and he just happened to kind of like stumble upon it, like half of the interventions that I think are out there. But what he finds is that by working using EMDR to process the core sadness of the loss, which is really what it all comes down to, once you process that enough through EMDR, you're able to be more open
Mm.
and have an after death communication come through. And not everybody has one, but it's about 75% of people in private practice that will go through this treatment that do. And it looks different for everybody. And like what you said is so true, because I've had people, they're like, "Oh, I don't believe this. This isn't real. I'm just making this up in my head." And but it does come to down to, how do they feel? What does it
Yeah.
mean? How, do that, there's some things that have happened in my office that I cannot explain. The program that I use, the light bar that I used going off, my iPad screen going sideways even though I haven't moved it, the lights going off, like there's been some smells in my office that like you can't explain.
Mm.
It's been wild.
Yeah.
It really, and I have chills usually after like a session like that, but some people still doubt it, even though it's like, right, I can feel it. I'm like, "Oh, this
Yeah.
is real." But it's about bringing you comfort and finding that. And so how do you stay connected? I think there's a really great book called Signs by Laura Lynn Jackson. She's a medium. And it really talks about, like, you don't necessarily need to go to a medium. You can learn to develop this connection with your loved one on your own. You can ask for these signs. Some people tell me that they write something on a piece of paper and they put it under their pillow, and then they'll have a dream about their loved one that
Mm.
night. I
Okay.
don't know. I've never tried that,
Yeah.
but you know, but I think it's about, how can it's all really comes down to is continuing bonds, right? And continuing
Yeah.
bonds is, how do you keep this connection with your loved one even though they're gone? What does that look like? Right. And maybe it's those signs that do keep that connection. And that's great. If you see a yellow butterfly and it brings you peace and comfort and makes you think that your loved one is there, awesome. That's what
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for a lot of people, it is part of their grief process and part of their grief work. Not for everybody. Some people, again, are either settled in their faith or
Yeah,
not wanting to search for
absolutely.
the answers any further. But I have plenty of people that like make this part of their grief journey, is starting to investigate because it matters more. I'm sure it mattered before, but it matters a lot more now because they like need to know, where did they go? Am I going to see them
Exactly.
again? So a lot of people I know will, take advantage of resources, books and podcasts. Near death experience
Mhm.
is a place where a lot of people feel like they find some things that bring them comfort and make sense to them. And I agree with you. I think it's about, since there's no certainty, here for most of us, some people again do have it, but for me, like if I can rest on a place or a thought that I'm like, I like that. I like that. Thinking about that and thinking that that's how it happens or when it's going to happen is something that I can actually just sit with and be like, that's the place I think that we want to reach. It's not certainty, but it's just enough,
Yep.
to kind of settle into.
Yep.
So yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
always very interesting stuff. What you do in your office sounds so cool.
Oh, it is. Can I tell you, I want to just tell you one story. So
Yeah.
I have my running program, Healing Strides. So the first hour is a group, and then second hour we train for the 5K race. So I used to bring in a breathwork teacher, and there's mixed reviews because breathwork is it's really intense and can be a lot. So it's not something I do all the time, but this one group I had breathwork come in, and because we are looking at how effective this group is, we do some pre-tests and post-tests. And I had one participant who said she had no religious or spiritual beliefs. Like she just believed you died and that was it. So breathwork teacher came in. She didn't tell us anything that night. It was a great session, whatever. We walked outside. She still didn't tell us anything. The next week she came back. She said, I have to talk about something. And she said, during breath work last week, my father came through to me.
Oh,
And
wow.
she had an after death communication, and he was in the Air Force. I think the Air Force. And when we walked outside that night to go for our run, the the plane that he would fly flew over us.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. And so she's like, I couldn't talk about it for days.
Yeah.
It's been like, because like this isn't what I believe, right? And
Yes.
so her post test, her scores about spirituality and about beliefs changed drastically because of that experience.
Yeah.
And it was just it was amazing, for her, and she found so much comfort in that, but it was,
Oh, it's
you know
wonderful. Well,
yeah, it was
and
pretty cool.
isn't that all you can hope to find in the
Exactly.
midst of all of this is comfort, peace, connection.
Mhm.
I think in the wake of grief, that's what anybody could be hoping for, you know. So yeah, you do it the way you need to. I have people talk to me about mediums, like again, kind of like some people are just, yeah, I definitely want to go. That's what I want to do. Some people feel a little stranger about it. I guess it's the search for comfort wherever that takes you, not to be too afraid of it, I think
Yeah.
is important.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing I tell my clients if they're ready to go to a medium is just don't go in with any expectations.
Yeah, good idea.
Because, you don't wanna be let down, you want I think even with the after death communication in my office, people want this, like, specific thing, and it doesn't always look as exactly like,
Right.
they wanna be able to see their loved one come through and visualize them and talk to them, and sometimes, all mediums are different too, some hear, some it's more of a feeling, some see, so we also have to remember how they may come through to us may not be exactly what we think either.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, thank you, Kelly. I really I like hearing, those experience. I could do those stories all day.
Me too.
I mean, they're just I love that. So, all right. Well, thank you. And we'll be back next time to do this again.